I am just still so confused by what's going on in the markets. Jerome Powell, these rates, what to make of all of it. I mean, the markets are doing great. Most people on Main Street say the economy is not doing great. So let's try to figure this out after Jerome Powell yesterday held his latest press conference. And say good morning and hello to Taylor Riggs. She's the co-host and co-anchor of The Big Money Show, 12 o'clock Central Time on Fox Business. Taylor, good morning. What should we take out of Jerome Powell's press conference yesterday?
I know everything feels so complicated. Thank you for having me. I think the main takeaway and what really surprised people is that the Fed came out yesterday and said that they are still on track to cut rates about 3 times this year. A lot of people thought that given the hotter than expected inflation numbers that we got in January and February, that the Federal Reserve would be a little nervous about cutting rates. Inflation is still running hot. A lot of people thought maybe they will only cut rates 2 times this year. But in fact, they hinted that actually it'll still be about 3 cuts this year, 3 cuts next year, 3 cuts the following year after that. Now, those years are far out in the future, so we really just want to focus on this year. That really was a surprise to the markets. And I think this showed that this is a Federal Reserve that's really focused on making sure that we don't fall into a recession, even if it means inflation is running a little bit hotter than expected.
So what is Jerome Powell's calculation? Because I know he said a couple of weeks ago on 60 Minutes that he would not wait for inflation to get down to that 2% number to start cutting rates, and that's kind of in line with what he said yesterday. What's his calculation behind not waiting to get to that 2% inflation target?
That's a really smart question. So inflation typically is a lagging indicator. So by the time you get to 2% inflation in the monthly data that we get every month, it's old data, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So he's hinting that he can start cutting as long as the trajectory, the long-term trend is heading in the right direction. We're getting close or near to that 2% level, but we don't need to get to actually 2%. By the time you get to actually 2% and then wait to start cutting, it actually could be too late. Rates could be too restrictive. Inflation could be too low. And actually, we could be closer to an economic recession. Mm-hmm. So this is the complication, right? Is trying to figure out the timing when. I think it is further complicated that it's an election year. You cannot be cutting rates heading into an election year as we're all going to the polls in November, because that makes it seem like the Federal Reserve is boosting the economy to help the incumbent. Jay Powell really wants to make sure that he doesn't do that. So they have a really tough year out for them. Mm-hmm. But I do trust that they're, looking at a mix of all of the different data and trying to do the right thing.
Taylor Riggs, co-anchor of The Big Money Show, 12 o'clock Central on Fox Business, is joining us. So what about then, do you think there's, not to, I guess, speculate too much, but is there a possibility that Powell is trying to not freak out the markets a little bit here, knowing full well he's gone from projecting 6 rate cuts this year to 5 to 4 to 3? Is it possible he's just saying this, knowing full well they're never actually going to do it because of all the reasons you just mentioned? The inflation reports are hot, and also it's an election year.
The good news is that he is the chair, but it doesn't totally fall 100% on him. So the fun thing about yesterday's meeting is we got this thing called the dot plot, which is basically anywhere from 16 to 19 members of the Federal Reserve get together, and they put a dot on a map of where they think interest rates will be at the end of the year. And then you take a look at the median dot, right, the middle dot of those. So we don't know which dot was his. His vote is equal to everyone else's vote. But it sort of gives you a range of how all of the members on the committee are thinking. So I think you're right. I mean, we came into this year thinking inflation was under control. We were going to get 6 rate hikes. We keep talking about when is the recession going to come. And I think they've tried to do a good job at tamping down expectations on the market without totally freaking us out. So I think if you come in and originally you say 6 rate cuts, a lot of people are thinking that's great. We want low interest rates. But on the other side of that, what kind of recession does that mean that we're in that you have to cut 6 times?
Yeah.
So I think he's trying to walk that fine line, right, of 3 cuts is just enough to keep the economy in that soft landing not get a recession, but we could go to 2, was a very slim majority of those who wanted 3 versus 2. So we really are on that cusp, but wanting to make sure we are controlling inflation and not keeping rates so high that it does push us into a recession.
And now the markets, Taylor, I mean, they are absolutely in love with this news yesterday, as they have been for, several months now. What's the outlook now for the markets as we go into not just the short term, but the long term with yesterday's press conference?
I know the market really took yesterday as a positive sign, again, because we thought maybe with the hot inflation data, would we only get 2 rate cuts? Powell, of course, and the rest of the chairman thinking maybe we'll actually still get 3. So the markets loved it. The equity markets love low interest rates, because the basic math says the lower the interest rate, the higher the value of the equity market. It's sort of a simple way to think about it. So equity markets were pretty positive on the news. And frankly, from everything I'm hearing, people still love these equity markets. Again, as long as we don't get that big recession, there's so much innovation in this country between AI, all of these new inventions that we're getting that when we thought the equity markets wouldn't be this strong, AI maybe has totally changed the game. And so I keep hearing, equity markets still have room to run higher, though I always caution, time in the market versus timing the market. So you want to try not to get in and out and time it, but just stay invested, don't touch your 401k, and eventually the markets will be higher a couple years from now than they are today. We hope.
Yeah, we hope. Absolutely. And last thing on that note, Taylor, how concerned should the average investor be with the fact that these big tech stocks, driven in large part by AI, NVIDIA, and the others, are such an enormous percentage now of just the market at large? And the fact that, I saw some data the other day that from Goldman Sachs, the market cap of the largest stock now is 750 times the market cap of a 75th percentile stock. How big of a deal is that?
So when you mention that makes me think of the dot-com bubble, right?
Yes.
And we all get really nervous. Oh my gosh, it's all concentrated in big tech and big cap stocks. The only caveat that I hear why this time is different is back in the dot-com bubble, you had companies that weren't churning out profit. They weren't real. They were just creating dot-com accounts to be online in that new internet era. And everyone was valuing them at sky high prices. I actually am hearing this time is different. NVIDIA is making real chips, real things that are powering AI that are changing our lives. So while the valuations look high, if you think about what they're actually doing, it may not be as unreasonable as we thought. So I do hear the good news is this time is very different. Be careful to compare it back to the dot-com era.
All right. I like the optimism. A lot. Great stuff. Of course, Taylor Riggs joining us here on KCMO Talk Radio. Thank you so much. We appreciate it there, Taylor. We'll be watching today at noon on Fox Business. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Well done there. We appreciate her hopping on KCMO Talk Radio.